Hey everybody, this is your host, Nevin of the Populist Patriot. I've been having some technical difficulties for some apparent reason, but now I think we should be up and running. The next news item that I came across is in The Intercept. Centrist Democratic PAC's Political Action Committee sole funder is a Republican Megadonor. The Moderate Political Action Committee, so-called Moderate PAC, created to go after progressive, meaning populist, primary challengers, received all its money from one source, Republican Megadonor Jeffrey Yass, Y-A-S-S. And he is based in Pennsylvania. Well, very interesting. Now, people like myself, Trevor Loudon, and others will talk about how, the Communist Party USA has had their imprint in the Democratic Party, and it's all true. But a bigger problem and a bigger, even just as sinister force within the Democratic Party are these massive mega donors that might be socially liberal, possibly in some cases. I mean, Yaz is a libertarian, so obviously he's socially liberal and he's fiscally conservative, or really fiscally extremely classically liberal. And they're doing this to protect their own wealth and privilege and their material self-interest, often to the detriment of our progress as a nation and as a people. So let's go through this here. A cadre of moderate Democrats and Republicans are joining together to revamp a political action committee to fight against progressive, meaning populist primary challengers to establishment Democrats. Now, when they say moderate, the Overton window has moved. What is considered moderate today really was not moderate when my parents were growing up. Things like rampant financial deregulation, the export of jobs, totally opening your borders and exploiting undocumented as well as foreign visa workers and immigrants, destruction of unions, that was not considered moderate. Basically saying that it doesn't matter if you work hard at a job, you could lose your job in an instant through no fault of your own because of downsizing. That was not considered moderate. And it was the Carter and especially the Clinton and Obama Democrats, whatever their radical postures in past may have been, they've implemented these policies, and particularly in the case of Clinton, with the active support of corporate and even libertarianish Republicans like Phil Gramm. But I digress. With President Joe Biden's former campaign manager as the so-called moderate PAC's only consultant and a defense contractor executive as its treasurer, the moderate PAC stands to be an exemplar of the Democratic Party's corporate-friendly so-called centrist wing. And Republican megadonor Jeff Yass, the richest man in Pennsylvania, is virtually the only one putting money into the group. So, and according to the Justice Democrats Executive Director Alexandra Rojas, whatever our agreement or disagreement with the Justice Democrats, really what it is he's right when he's saying this. The corporate-backed establishment will stop at nothing to prevent more bartenders, nurses, principals, community organizers, and regular people from entering the Democratic Party in Congress. They would rather buy elections than let working-class progressives even run. And I'm talking about working class. I'm white-collar working class. I am not rich by any stretch. I mean, I'm not starving, but I'm not rich. People like us here in the audience, you all, should be able to run. You shouldn't have a fat checkbook. It shouldn't matter if you have a fat wallet or not as to whether you run, because really and truly, in order to propel our nation forward, you need an aristocracy, a warrior intellectual aristocracy. a Huey Long type, a Franklin Roosevelt type. I mean, Huey Long, he had his flaws, and there are things I disagree with him on, obviously. Same thing with Franklin Roosevelt, but you need this sort of warrior. Teddy Roosevelt is probably the best case in point here. You need people, whether they have money or not, you need a warrior intellectual aristocracy, and they can come from all classes. And so far, most of the wealthy class in this nation has failed our nation. And I've cataloged this tirelessly on the program, as well as also in my writings. They would rather buy elections than let working class progressives even run. They will do everything in their power to make themselves richer at the expense of robbing poor and working class Americans. And this is where this Jeffrey Yaz came in order to really stymie populist change. And he is putting money where his mouth is. He is a co-founder and managing director of a Philadelphia-based investment firm. He gave the PAC $1 million in July of 2022. He was a vice chair at the Libertarian Cato Institute. I mean, why is even the Democratic Party even taking money from him? Yaz is basically a reactionary. He wants to destroy the legitimate elements of the New Deal, of whatever remnants there are of unions and things of that nature. Democratic Party should not be taking money from this individual. But the fact of the matter is that the so-called moderate Democrats, I call them Reaganite lights, they have more in common with the libertarians, particularly on economic policy. It was these so-called moderates of, for example, Bill Clinton that deregulated Wall Street, with the onset of the Commodities Futures Modernization Act of the year 2000, the deregulation or the elimination of Glass-Steagall in 1999, et cetera, et cetera. The passages of the various free trade agreements like NAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China. There is this overlap with Beltway libertarianism. They want the same things. They are blocking populist change. And right now, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, the only ones that are pushing for populist pro-labor change are a handful of Democrats, where even I have disagreements with them on issues maybe on national security and some of the foreign policy agenda items. But when it comes to economic reforms, this country is badly in need of economic reforms. Don't be fooled by Democrats that call themselves moderates, ladies and gentlemen in the audience. These are not moderates. These are Reaganite lights. You know what used to be considered moderate? There was a time when busting unions and eliminating or privatizing Social Security was considered a crackpot idea. Once upon a time, there was a Republican named Dwight Eisenhower. You all have heard of him. And he said in the 1950s, if there was ever a political party that called for the abolition of Social Security or busting unions, that party would be basically laughed out of existence and be into the dustbin of history. And sadly, Eisenhower was right for his time, because more and more people were accepting of unions in the 1950s in this country, especially outside of the southern part of the United States. Most people thought Social Security was a good thing. The Republican platform of, and I'm going to answer your comment, Faze. Thanks so much for writing there. Most people accepted that. Now privatizing Social Security is on, once again, the Republican agenda. So now these ideas have become crackpot. Libertarian, ultra quote unquote free market fundamentalism is now considered mainstream thought and has been for 40 plus years, sadly, in the Republican Party. The Republican Party has moved away from Eisenhower. And now you have this crossover with libertarian billionaires like Yaz as well as corporate so-called moderate Democrats. This is an example of where the establishments of both parties are against the American people. That's what it comes down to. Now, Faze, let me just get a little drink. Thanks, Faze, for listening and commenting. Reforms won't do much. Reshuffling programs won't make a difference if the corruption in key places isn't removed. That's an excellent point. And I agree. We have to have reforms, but they have to be far-reaching reforms, and they have to be very profound. The only way that could come about is a rather uncomfortable topic. And it could come about through a variety of ways. I am convinced that a major economic catastrophe is going to propel this nation to the point where hopefully people will be out in the streets, like what's going on in France at this time, for example. What I would say is if we're at a point where there's 50% unemployment, where you have 10 cities growing in every city, where it's just so overwhelming, that I think that's what's going to take, that's going to be the situation that's going to propel us over the edge, unfortunately. Because I think the American people right now, there's a lot of grumbling, but I think people are accepting it too much. I think it's going to take a major global war, or a major economic catastrophe that's going to be felt, or really a sort of collapse of corporate capitalism, a collapse of the neoliberal, market fundamentalist, highly financialized system that contains, I would argue, the seeds of its own self-destruction. And once that cannibalization process occurs, that's where you're going to have people pressing for change. Now, what scares me is what direction will that change go? Will it go towards my ideology of radical civic nationalism, where you're going to have a New Deal that will preserve capitalism, that will preserve a large degree of political freedom, of religious freedom? Is it going to go into fascism? Is it going to go to communism or some other form of socialism, which is something that I don't support, and my co-host Herschel Miller does not support on this program? That's what's going to have to happen. And we're going to have changes made to the Constitution, where, for example, to the preamble of the Constitution, not only domestic tranquility and security, we're also going to have items that will address, like a phrase like ensuring shared but earned prosperity. And we're also going to have to put planks and amendments in the Constitution that promote collective bargaining between capital and labor. Certain social rights need to be perhaps discussed, like what goes on in other advanced capitalist countries, and also outlawing money in politics. And we're basically going to have a strong executive and a Congress that's going to put into place constitutional amendments that overturns Buckley versus Vallejo, Citizens United, Bellotti versus the First Bank of Boston, ban lobbying by former senators, congressmen, cabinet secretaries, government employees. Once you leave Congress, once you leave the presidency, once you leave a cabinet position, you're banned for life for lobbying for a particular company, trade association, or law firm. That's the end of the story, And also, again, you outlawing super PACs, publicly funded elections. That's how we're gonna end the corruption. And then you're gonna find and shorten the election cycles too. Why is these elections go on for 1 or 2 years? It's crazy. All these long drawn-out primaries and 50 debates and all the rest of it. Make it 6 months. Let's see if we could shorten the election cycle and make it less expensive for the American people as well as the candidates. Let them have one or two debates, get their message out to the American people, let them travel for 6 months, maybe a year at most, get the primary done in a year, get the general election done in a year, promote their message, encourage them to go, people to go on their websites, and boom, that's it. And there's a lot more I can go over about the corruption, but the key to the corruption, the key factor that's destroying American politics is the corporate influence. Now, but I'm sure some of you, I think, are not listening. A few of you had to tune out. That's fine. Maybe I'm going on and on and on. I have a tendency to do that. But and some of you might be offended because it sounds very leftist. Look, I'm a populist. And, in order to be an effective anti-communist and a patriot, you have to recognize that a large number of the corporate capitalists, and I have, documented this in my other programs and my books, they have no interest in the United States. They openly say that. They might pay lip service, but in reality, when it comes to investment decisions and whatnot, they are out for themselves. Yet they're trying to also basically bully the government and use their influence to get the policies that they want. So anyways, I'm going to end this stream right now. Thank you, Phased, for the comment. I think reforms can help, but I think what we need to do is, I agree with you, we need to root out the corruption. And unfortunately, it's going to take a major, major national catastrophe to wake American people up. The Great Recession didn't do it. COVID didn't do it. I think it has to be something worse than the Great Recession, worse than COVID. And I am convinced it's going to have to be 50% unemployment rate, 10 cities in every street corner, or a major world war with Russia and China that will throw us off balance. And I think that's going to give us the push, and hopefully a push in the right direction for change, hopefully. Because let me tell you, my views of radical civic nationalism, yes, it is pro-working class, but it's also an insurance policy against those that would want to cut the throats of the billionaires and the millionaires. Believe me. So in that sense, I see myself in the role of President Franklin Roosevelt. The only force that's stopping the storming of the Bastille. So in order to stop the storming of the Bastille against the hated potential socialist or communist or fascist revolution, the 1%, they need to really wake the fuck up, or they are woken, but they need to take this seriously. They can't just hide in their bunkers when the shit hits the fan, because eventually the revolutionaries will find you and drag you out and kill you. And then of course the revolutionaries will be their own new corrupt elite, probably even worse than the billionaires. So people like me are the ones standing in the way and protecting your asses. So anyways, enough of my rant. I've been also kind of pissed off at the news. I've been listening to a lot of Thomas Frank and stuff like that, and just kind of going through the history of how just the American people, life is getting harder and harder for hardworking people, and it didn't have to be this way. It's very upsetting, and it's even more upsetting for me that I have a daughter who now is living in a country which is almost becoming unlivable for average Americans, and it's very upsetting to me as a father and as a proud American. Alrighty, got more stuff coming up.